Let's talk about React Server components. It's probably one of the most important changes in React in recent years, but I don't think we've spent enough time understanding why we need them, and that's exactly what we are going to cover today. To really get why React Server components were created, we need to briefly talk about two most popular web rendering strategies: client-side and server-side rendering. So, client-side rendering. It's the most common rendering strategy used in modern web development. If you have ever built React app before, you've used CSR for sure. For a long time, React's documentation recommended starting projects with Create React App CLI, which set up client-side rendering by default. But what exactly is client-side rendering? Let's break it down. When you type a website URL into your browser, the server responds with almost empty HTML file. Typically, this file contains a root div and a link to a JavaScript bundle. This JavaScript file includes your entire React application, every component, all the logic and libraries. Now imagine how large that JavaScript bundle can get with app like e-commerce, for example. Once the JS is fully loaded, React initializes, creating virtual DOM and starts rendering entire UI. This involves generating the HTML elements, attaching event listeners, and so on. When React finishes building the virtual DOM, it injects everything into the root div element in the real DOM. After the UI is rendered, the app makes API calls to fetch required data. Once these steps are completed, the page becomes fully interactive and ready for the user. A lot of stuff. And since everything happens on the client side, the entire process of constructing the UI is handled by the user's browser. This means the page won't be fully interactive until the JS file is downloaded, parsed, executed, and the data from the API is fetched. If the user's internet connection is slow, or if the app is super large, this can lead into long loading times. During this time, the user might just see a blank page or loading indicator, an experience that is far from ideal. One day, someone realized that many websites consist mostly of static content, stuff that doesn't change often, and that's how server-side rendering came into play. With SSR, instead of getting an empty HTML file, then building the whole page from a large JavaScript bundle on the client side, the server pre-renders the static content and sends a fully formatted HTML document to the browser. When a user visits a page, they see a fully rendered page almost immediately. The HTML file still contains a JavaScript bundle, but it's much lighter compared to client-side rendering bundle. React doesn't need to build the entire page structure from scratch. Instead, it performs hydration. It's a process where React takes the pre-rendered HTML and fills it with interactivity, like adding event listeners to buttons. This approach is much faster and more efficient than CSR because the heavy lifting is done on the server side. Now, imagine if we could serve not only just a static content from the server, but also fetch dynamic data and include it directly in our pre-rendered HTML. Earlier versions of Next.js introduced a function called getServerSideProps. which allowed data to be fetched on the server side for each request before rendering the page. This was a really clever workaround to ensure that data was available for the initial render without requiring client-side fetching. However, get server-side props had its limitations. It could only fetch data when a page was requested, making it less efficient for larger apps with complex data needs. It also means not every component could use it, as it was limited only to pages. This feature was developed by Next.js team specifically for the Next.js framework and wasn't a React standard. That's why clever folks at React came up with server-side components. Alright, now we know why React server components were created. Let's break down how they work. Just a quick note. Currently, server components are only available out of the box in Next.js from version 13.4. The best way to start with them is to set up Next.js project. Let's compare now React server components with a normal one side by side. First thing you can see is asynchronous component. Yes, RSC can do it, meaning you can use async and await directly to fetch the data. This is different from traditional components, which must return JSX synchronously. The next thing, server-only execution. One of the key benefits of React server component is that they run exclusively on the server. This allows you to perform server-side operations, such as querying a database directly. What's more, since the code is executed only on the server, the component itself doesn't get included into the JavaScript bundle. All of that improves page performance and minimizes client-side processing. The next thing, efficient data fetching. Fetching data on the server is faster than doing it on the client side with useEffect or any data fetching library like React Query or Axios. This is because servers often have high-speed connections, such as fiber optics, which can handle data requests way quicker than the client's browser. 4. Limited React API. RSCs are designed to run exclusively on the server. They don't render on the client. And because of that, they don't support most of the React APIs, like for example useState or useEffect hooks, which are designed for managing client-side state. Any UI interactions that require re-rendering should still use traditional components, and that leads us to the next point. Client directive. By default, every component you create, assuming you are using Next.js, is server component. However, if you need a component to behave like a traditional React component with access to client-side features, you can use client directive at the top of your file. This directive converts the server component into a client one, allowing you to use all React API like hooks as usual. Last but not least, quick note on terminology. React server components are components that run only on the server. And traditional components we've been using so far are called now client components, even though they run first on the server to pre-render content and then on the client side to add interactivity. Yeah, that's new naming might be confusing. Alright, a lot of information. Let's wrap this up. Server components are designed to run exclusively on the server. They handle data fetching and render static content. This results in smaller JavaScript bundle that is sent to the client, which reduce loading time and improve performance, although they are not designed to trigger re-renders and update UI, so you can't use most of React API with them, like hooks for example. For that case, use client components, which are ones that we know, love and we've been using so far. They are designed to handle dynamic parts of your app by updating the UI in real time. They take over after the initial HTML from the server is loaded, ensuring your applications remain responsive and interactive. In other words, use server components unless your terminal will scream on you. And that's it. Feel free to explore React server components, set up Next.js project and start playing with them. Thanks for watching and see you soon.